Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining me. Today, I want to chat a bit about Stars Between the Sun and Moon, One Woman's Life in North Korea, An Escape to Freedom by Lucia, Jang, and Susan McClelland. This was, I believe, from what I could tell, um, published originally in Canada in 2014, maybe. Not completely sure about that. I read this electronic edition, which was the first American edition. Published in 2015. But yeah, I chose this because one of my 2017 reading goals for my must-read list was to read diversity, and that included diversity of genres. And so this was a memoir, and I heard about this book off of Bree Hill's channel last year, and so I had this down sort of on my radar to read. And since it concerned North Korea, it was a memoir, about North Korea, and I know very little about North Korea. I decided to choose this one. I don't know a lot, like I said, about North Korea. I think, I only get kind of what's in the news, and that's really political. So I was real curious to read someone's experience, that comes from North Korea, that had sort of firsthand experience with it. So that's why I chose it. So what it's about, it's basically about her life in North Korea, starting at maybe like an elementary school age girl to all the way up until well into her adulthood. And it's really a story of hunger, really basically a never-ending hunger. It seems like she never really had enough to eat. Even as a child, other children, her cousins and other children she knew and other people she knew, had vitamin deficiencies and all sorts of signs of malnutrition. It seems like her family, her father worked in a factory, I think, but they did not have a very high status because of some of her mother's relatives had defected to South Korea back early on, and that's really one of the biggest transgressions that a person can do in this culture, is sort of seen like traitorous and, a betrayal of them all. And so that sort of marked her family's status. And so that really affected her later, like when she was looking for someone to marry, because marriage is one of these things, it apparently in this culture, that is arranged by the families a lot of times. And her family wasn't really able to ensure that she could get a good husband. So she winds up marrying someone really over the objections of her father even, but she does, and that doesn't turn out real well for her. I don't know how much I should give away. It's obviously not that spoiler driven. She escapes because it's right there in the title, but she ultimately has to do a lot of different things in order to just survive. She's always trying to, basically a never-ending search for food. So when these famines kind of come and go, and most of the time they seem to be there, people often at one point or several points got desperate enough to try to go into China and get food and bring it back for their families, not necessarily to defect, but there were people that actually put themselves into human trafficking because they felt like that life was better for them than what they faced there in North Korea. So the person here, Lucia Jang, by the way, that's not her Korean name, but this is what, in the book she goes by a different name. I did not jot that down, so I do not remember her Korean name. It wasn't mentioned that often in the book because the book is kind of written for her from her first person kind of perspective. But she obviously goes by Lucia Jang now because that's what she's using for being the author of this book. So anyway, she eventually does this as well as far as human trafficking goes, has a sort of experience with that. The other thing is that when people are caught doing this sort of thing across the border, or selling themselves into being traffickers themselves or selling themselves into trafficking, when they're returned to North Korea, if they're caught and returned back to North Korea, they face prison, and that can be also quite brutal. And so she has all these sorts of harrowing experiences before it's all said and done. It's just really heartbreaking, really, parts of it. Takeaways from it, one thing about the government, she spends most of her time with her own personal experience, and she's got a lot more to worry about than who the government is. But we do get a glimpse of the government, and her family's sort of loyalty to it, and all of the people she knows loyalty to it, and the sort of whenever people are caught in some sort of transgression. Like there was some schoolmate of hers whose family was taken away to some sort of concentration camp for some sort of transgression, and she felt relief because she thought of them as, once she found out what they had done, she thought of them as traitors. So she actually thought of them, like what had happened to them was justified. But just this sort of thing. But about the government, it felt so alien to me that it almost felt like I was reading about a science fiction work. In science fiction, a lot of times there will be a constructed government that people on another planet, humans on another planet, have decided to make some kind of government, and it's sort of a thought experiment then for what would life be like under this government. But no, this government's real and it exists. But I don't want to demonize the North Koreans for saying that, they're bad people because they have chosen this government. For one, she obviously did not choose this government. She's powerless to change this government, and so she's doing the best she can just to get a cabbage leaf to eat here and there. And so, this sort of thing has happened to humans. It's not unique to North Korea. It has happened to humankind the world over, repeatedly. And I think that people here in the U.S., a lot of times, since we have had such a relatively stable country, that we might get lulled into this sense of complacency, like, this kind of thing could never happen to us. But yet we could, because it's just the lesson's been repeated throughout time with history that humans are prone to this kind of thing, to take an ideology and to take it to some sort of what might seem later as extreme. And so it's not unique to North Koreans. It's happened to cultures all around the world, and hopefully it won't continue to happen, but right now it shows no signs of really abating. So it's something I think that all humans everywhere need to be vigilant for. And then the other thing was the level of hunger. It's another thing that was really alien to me. I've been doing this alternate day, it's called an intermittent fasting program, since last March. So I've done quite a bit of fasting every other day, as a matter of fact, every other 24-hour period. But my fasting is fasting. It's not hunger. It's not starvation. At the end of my fasting period, I have plenty of food waiting on me. And this is something that she didn't have. At one point when she was in China and she was being sent back to North Korea, the main regret she had was cooking oil. She was going to miss cooking oil because it's not something that it was a precious thing to have in North Korea. And in China, of course, it's plentiful. So, parts of the story like this are just heartbreaking. The other thing was about the brutality of just human on human brutality. And it's another thing that's not unique to North Korea at all, but common to humans the world over, is that when people are vulnerable, there are other humans sometimes, there's people who want to help and helpers, but then there's a lot of other times there's people waiting right there to exploit that person's desperation in all sorts of brutal and cruel ways. And then just the other thing about punishment, like in the prisons and things where, because they're seen as sort of less than, because they transgressed against the society somehow, and it's again not unique to North Korea, but treated with a certain brutality that just as an onlooker through reading this book was just, really difficult sometimes to watch. I did want to talk about the title, though, before I run out of time, because The Stars Between the Sun and Moon comes from a childhood story that her mother told her that sort of inspired her and gave her strength through a lot of her desperate struggles. So did I think she heard it's called the Flower Girl song. I think it's what it's called. I didn't write that down, but it was from a movie that she saw. She didn't get to see very many movies, but she saw this song in a movie, The Flower Girl, and that song really sustained her and inspired her through all sorts of hard times. But this childhood story, from The Stars Between the Sun and the Moon, at one time she recites this, she uses this sort of story. It's about a little girl who climbs up in a tree to escape a tiger, and she asks the sky to send her a rope so that she can escape the tiger. And there's a quote that I wrote down about this that she's thinking of later on when she's in a place where she wants to escape from. She's in lots of places she wants to escape from throughout the course of this memoir, but in this particular case, she says, "Oh sky," I thought to myself, "I won't ask so much to become the sun or the moon, just one of the stars in between. If you send me a rope to help me to escape this room." So that's where the title comes from, Stars Between the Sun and Moon. I won't ask so much to become the sun or the moon, just one of the stars in between if you'll send me a rope. So yeah, it's just really heartbreaking. About the brutality, another instance in the story was this woman, she's talking to this woman eventually in North Korea, and the woman's daughter has gone and been human trafficked into China, and the mother's only wish is, she's glad actually, she just hopes she got a kind husband or a kind person that bought her. So that sort of level of desperation where the mother prefers her daughter to have been sold into human trafficking, and but yet she'll never know probably what kind of life her daughter wound up with, and whether or not it was a kind person that she wound up with, I don't know. But I'd like to end this chat to remind myself and anybody watching this just to be that kind person, because you never really know what other people are experiencing. So yeah, just a really moving book in that regard. She does eventually escape. There's a beautiful scene when she escapes into Mongolia, and the Mongolians are nice to her, and it's just like, oh. And then eventually she does go to North Korea, and then now South Korea, and I think now she's living in Canada. So I will close the chat at that. I hope I didn't give away too much. I don't think what I gave away, I really don't think would ruin this experience for anybody, because it's really not so much about that kind of narrative, story driven. It's really about the emotion and with the struggles that she went through, and I didn't divulge that too much. So, all right, well, I'm going to close with that. So what I'm reading now is Siddhartha by Hermann Hesse. There is the cover. This is a modern library edition. I am almost finished with this. I'm literally maybe 15 pages away from finishing this. I'm in the last chapter, so I'll be finished with this soon and have a chat coming up for it, so stay tuned for that. Now let's do my drawing for my next work. I'm down to 5. I'm hoping to get through these 5 fairly quickly and get on to reading some other things this fall, which I've been waiting on. So anxious to get finished with my must-read list. Let's just pick this one. Okay. The Stone That Never Went Down. The Stone That Never Came Down. All right. Well, this one I picked. This is a classic science fiction work. Let me get the cover up for you. This is by John Brunner. There it is. Hang on. I thought I had the... Guess I don't. So what this is about is, John Brunner wrote Stand on Zanzibar, classic science fiction. I think this is from the 70s. This is it went out of print, and now there's a publisher that's doing some of these old out of print classic sci-fi works in in electronic editions. This is one of those. I heard about this book from the Final Blow Joe channel last year, and I really wanted to get it read. It takes place in I think it's a near futurist dystopian Britain, where there's a lot of social unrest and religious extremism, and then there is a medication, there's a pill invented that would cure a lot of social ills, these social ills like this, but comes with another social cost, and that's the dilemma. So I'm looking forward to getting that started and read fairly quickly and getting to that, so stay tuned for that. I think I will close with that. Until next time, take care. Bye.